All right, today's question is, why didn't Moses get to enter the promised land? We're in Numbers chapter 20, and it's one of the heaviest chapters in the whole book. It's got grief, frustration, disobedience, and consequences, even for God's most faithful servants. If you've ever wondered why Moses didn't make it into the promised land, this chapter right here tells you why. The answer? Because he misrepresented God in a moment of anger. And God takes his holiness seriously. Verses 1 through 5, we see another complaint, but the same old song. So in the first month, the whole community of Israel arrived at the wilderness of Zin, and there Miriam died. Right out the gate, we see loss. Moses' sister Miriam dies. And you'd think that folks would show a little compassion. Nope. There was no water. The people blame Moses and Aaron. Here we go again, complaining, quarreling, accusing God of failing. They're like, why'd you bring us out of Egypt to this terrible place? They still ain't learned nothing. Ain't it something how quickly we forget God's faithfulness when we're thirsty? Verses 6 through 8, we see God's instructions are clear. So Moses and Aaron do the right thing. They fall face down before the Lord, and God speaks. He says, take the staff and speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. Speak to the rock. Not strike it, not shout at it. Just speak. This rock ain't just a rock, y'all. It's a symbol of Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4 says the rock was Christ. And the first time back in Exodus, Moses struck the rock and water flowed. But now, God's saying you don't have to strike that rock again. Just speak. Why? Because Christ doesn't need to be crucified twice. Once was enough. Verses 9 through 13, we see Moses' big mistake. So Moses gathers the people and he says, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Whoa now. Did you catch that? He didn't speak to the rock. He spoke to the people. He didn't glorify God. He took the credit. And then he struck that rock twice with a staff. And yeah, water came out. God still provided. But he immediately said to Moses and Aaron, because you didn't trust me enough to honor me as holy, you will not bring this assembly into the land I'll give them. Now that's heartbreaking. Moses, God's faithful servant, led the people for 40 years, and in one moment of frustration, it cost him the finish line. Not because God was harsh, but because God is holy. And when leaders misrepresent him, especially in front of the people, he don't overlook that. In verses 14 through 21, we see that Edom refuses passage. So Israel asked to pass through Edom's land peacefully. But Edom says, nope, and threatens to come at them with swords if they try. So Israel backs off. No fight, no war, just waiting on God's timing. That's a good example of when restraint is obedience. Verses 22 through 29, we see Aaron's death. So the chapter ends with another death, the death of Aaron. God tells Moses to go up Mount Hor with Aaron and Eleazar. He says, take off Aaron's priestly garments and put them on Eleazar. And up there on the mountain, Aaron dies, and the people mourn for 30 days. It's a quiet, solemn moment. One of God's chosen leaders passes, and the mantle's passed on. So what's Numbers chapter 20 teaching us? Grief, pressure, and frustration don't excuse disobedience. God's instructions matter, especially to those who lead. And God still provides even when his people are out of line. And even the greatest leaders face consequences when they dishonor God's holiness. But here's the hope. That rock that Moses struck twice, it still poured out water because God is merciful, even when we mess up the message. So keep reading your Bible and don't be dumb.